Hello everybody and welcome back. Now today is the last video of the entire unit of World War One, and that is the effects of war, changes in the role and status of women. So this video may run a little longer than usual. However, this is the final point that we need to discuss, and that is how exactly did this war change women? How did it change the way we view women, the way we treat women, where they fit in society, and so on and so forth. So in this video, it's going to be broken down into three main parts here. Role, not only during the war, but post-war, and then status with how that changed in society. So we're going to first talk about roles within the war, and then we're going to talk about the status post-war. Now, what are we talking about? When we're talking about a role, we're talking about the function assumed or a part played by a person or a thing in a particular situation. So in this case, we're talking about how women changed from being forced to stay at home and into the factories and so on and so forth. Status. Status means the relative social, professional, or other standings of someone or something. So this is where we talk about low class, high class, and where women belong, where minorities belong, and so on and so forth. So this whole video is going to be centered around this core idea. What did women do, and how did that change their status? And kind of oscillate between the two, as we will see in a little bit. So the first thing we need to talk about is the role of women. So the role of women needs to be seen through white women first. And we want to talk about white women first because they are the ones who initiated first wave feminism, or at least that's who we accredit for ushering in first wave feminism in the United States and in Europe. So what first wave feminism is essentially women trying to gain the right to vote, trying to gain their voice, trying to gain sexual control of their own body. But a huge part of first wave feminism was white women first, everyone else later. And there was core elements of first wave feminism that said, you know, why is a black man able to vote before I am? And I am a white woman. So a lot of what we see with first wave is this really deep entrenched reflection of the segregation in the United States and the hate that was held. So when when the war begins and some of the women stay home, there's this fight, not only what was occurring just before the First World War with first wave feminism and the push for more white rights for women, but also pushing for we white women deserve more rights than the minorities first. We should get them first, then everybody else. Then we will fight to get somebody else in. So the role of women leading to the war was staying at home, some working, especially if you were lower class or middle class, and a push for trying to gain their status in society, trying to gain any sort of upward mobility. And so when the war began, women were given essentially a few choices on what they could do. One, they can work in the factories as you see here, right? Producing shell casings, producing metal, bombs, tanks, vehicles, anything and everything that was needed for the war effort. And so you had that choice at home. If you were brave, you could go to the front line. But even on the front line, you were not allowed to go anywhere near combat. In fact, more often than not, you were used in one of two ways. The first, and the way that most people know, is nursing and working with the Red Guard. So that they would treat wounded soldiers, they would treat casualties, they'd work on doing any sort of thing that they can to try to help keep the soldiers alive, regardless of what side it was. German, British, French, didn't matter. Now, what's really interesting about this is that one of the most important women we see in the front line is a woman by the name of Marie Curie. I don't have a picture of her up here yet. Who brought the first X-ray system to the battlefield by getting behind a truck, driving and hitting the front line, trying to take X-rays of soldiers who needed it for their life-saving operation. If you did not go into the medical field, then you were pushed for other humanitarian aid. And that humanitarian aid, especially through the United States, and the United States is the one who pushed this the most, I should say, was what we call donut girls, where it was women who came to the front line, as you can see on the picture on the screen, and their sole focus was to make the pastry that we now know as donuts, fry them up, give them to the troops, and interact with the troops. Give them a morale boost. Give them a break from the horrors that they're seeing at war. Give them a break from what's going on. And so this is one of the first times where women were able to get close enough to the front to help, but not actually be in the trenches, at least for the majority of the countries. In fact, women were really pushed to stay as morale boosters rather than nurses, rather than getting and seeing the true horrors of war, because of how society saw women as only really helping in that regard. Like, yes, you can be nurses, but we need you more to make boys smile. We need you more to help keep the men wanting to know what they're killing for, wanting to know what they are dying for. And so the role of women is nearly exactly the same. If you went to the front line, it was basic cooking, basic cleaning, or actually, this isn't basic. This is actually very difficult baking. But it's the same push of, we're going to keep you in the role that you're in. We're just going to give you a uniform, put you relatively near danger, still far enough away, but anything could happen. And you're going to continue to do what you're doing. Now, there's something really important to say here, and that is the fact that when we're looking at the role of women, this is unfortunately the majority of the experience. The majority of the experience is factories, nursing, and donut girls, or some sort of humanitarian aid. However, there's always exceptions. There are always exceptions to how this works. And in some cases, some armies did put women in the front line, but these women had to go through everything imaginable just to try to get to the front to help out. The two stories that I can really express about this is, this woman here was a British woman who, when trying to enroll to the front line, was essentially denied, and so she then went to the French, who denied her. She went to the Americans, who denied her, and eventually settled into Serbia, and Serbia said, hey, if you went to every other country and you're willing to kill, let's get you here. And her name is Captain Flora Saunders, and she went through the war with a pretty significant body count and came out of it as every other soldier. What's also interesting is the other woman that we can talk about is another woman from Serbia who was put into the Serbian army after she, very much like Mulan, she joined in her brother's name after her brother died, and from there kind of hid herself, or hid her femininity, and went to a fight in the war. In the middle of the war, they figured out, oh, well, she's a woman, but look at what she's doing. Look at her kill count. Look at how deadly she is. And then they decided, we'll keep her in. And she went in and kept fighting all the way until the end of the war in 1919. Her name was Mulyanka Savic. And so when we're looking at roles of women in the war, there are stories that we hear of famous women going into the front line, killing, and a lot of that is always looked upon as exceptions or special treatments, or dismissed by larger countries in favor of, we want women to stay in the kind of social status that they're in. Now, the funny thing about all of this is, even with women working as nurses, even with women being in the front lines as donut girls, and stories of women willing to put down their lives and willing to kill for countries, that after the war, there's a major push for an increasing of women's status in society. Because as soon as you give someone a taste of the privilege that was denied to them, as soon as you give someone a taste of the freedom that was denied to them, you cannot expect them to go back. And so immediately after the war, the push for women's liberation, the push for first wave feminism, the push for sexual liberation came strong and fast. And so post-war, the status of women severely increased, especially for white women. White women were the women who saw the biggest advantage after this. In the United States, you have the suffrage movement that gave women the right to vote in 1919. In Britain, women got the vote in 1920. Germany, 1919. Russia, 1917, because they went through their revolution. All of these major countries start to realize just how much the war depended on women, how much the war needed these women either to fight in the front or, and by fight on the front I mean the nurses and the donut girls, or working to build bandages, bullets, bombs, tanks, aircrafts, everything that they need. So post-war, a majority of white women saw a very big increase in society, but not minority women. Minority women, as we heard in the demographics video just preceding this one, there's a huge wave against and push for more segregation. And first wave feminism enabled that. First wave feminism pretty much said, we need to prioritize our vote, then we can worry about everyone else's. And so although there's a shift in the vote and rise of status for women, the biggest thing we need to walk away with is that it was not all women. It was only the status quo white women that were given more privilege, more freedom, and more rights. We don't see this push for everyone else until significantly later.